Hello, everyone. Welcome back to March. And in this March demystifying webinar, we'll talk about Red Giant Universe, and we'll see how to create beautiful graphical magic on timeline and then share it across multiple hosts in a collaborative workflow. And today, joining us are the industry experts. We have Jason here, and we have Nick Haras, and also Harry Frank. Jason is a very super talented broadcast television's post-production professional with over 30 years of experience, in which Jason has delivered BAFTA-winning sports coverage, promos, music videos, and primetime shows. And Nick is a certified Adobe, Apple, DaVinci, and also Avid instructor based in Toronto. And Nick is a post-productions expert and Red Giant master trainer as well. And Nick often produces educational content for LinkedIn Learning as well, Adobe, and also his own company, Creative 111. And very special guest joining us throughout March, Harry Frank. He's the senior technical artist who leads the technical and creative development of the Universe tools at Maxon. And throughout March, Harry will share his unique insights into not only how the tools were designed to be used, but also how you can adapt them in unexpected and unusual ways to achieve unconventional results. And me, myself, I've been Max, and I am the colorist and trainer for Maxon. And unfortunately, Simon failed to join us today, but he will catch up and he will join us next week. All right. Some usual housekeeping. If you want to know what's coming next in Maxon, you feel free to go to maxon.net and /events to check the upcoming webinars and also upcoming shows, the 3D motion design shows. And then if you want to access the recording of these sessions, this is being recorded, by the way. And if you want to access the recordings of the March webinar and also the webinars in the past, you can go to our YouTube channel, Maxon Training Team, and all the previous recordings of the webinars are available in the YouTube channel. And also free t-shirts. You can get free t-shirts by using the code demystifying03. So you have to add 03 now. And yeah, you can get free t-shirts. You probably only need to pay the postage around about $4 instead of the full price. And I've shared the links in the chat as well. And also, you can test your knowledge about the Red Giant tools. You can take assessment for Trap Code, Magic Bullet, and also Universe, and also VFX Suite. So, and in today's webinar, we'll be talking about building a full screen title and then hand it off to the colleague. And traditionally, probably it's not the editor job, but you know, as the lines getting thinner and we're walking the blurred lines, you know, editors are doing more and more. Probably Jason will be able to talk more about that. So I will hand it over to you, Jason.
Great, thank you. I might just turn my camera off so people can focus on the screen rather than me.
And Jason, sorry to interrupt. I just noticed there was a comment of some people in the audience saying that the audio is super rough. And I just wanted to make sure, how is everyone else out there? Can you let us know how the audio is sounding? And can you also see Jason's screen?
Which
awesome,
should be
so that's
there
good
now.
to Jonathan. And how can you guys see his soccer player with the soccer ball there in Premiere? Okay, so most people, audio is good, all great here in terms of sound. Just wanted to make sure everyone was able to see that. Sorry for the interruption, Jason.
Cool, no problem. So as Max was saying, I'm predominantly an editor, but I also do coloring work and graphics and things like that. And this was an example of an approach of a job I had recently where we were making a promo for a sports event that featured 21 teams, or 24 teams rather. And the big problem we had is I had to make a promo, and because they're all young teams, under 21s, there's no footage existing of them other than stuff that their families and friends have shot, even though they're semi-professional. So the brief for this job was to come up with a promo pretty much with no elements. And this is where I turn to Red Giant Universe quite often for a number of things. So for example, this was the introduction graphic, which I've just basically taken part of the logo, and you can see it just sort of comes in with some light rays and then ends up as a flat two-dimensional image on the logo on a background. So this started off as a 2D logo. So my way of thinking, I tend to sort of pull apart the logo and look at the separate elements, which you can see here. If we look at a couple of things, the background, the plain background is just a solid blue background, which is the branding color of the people I was doing it for. And then each layer, I just sort of pick apart different bits. So you can see this is quite subtle. If I turn on, this just gives us a shape, and this is actually part of the brand again. And there's a few different elements. So this little disc, I didn't make that. It's just a case of animating it. So to give it life, if I step into that, I'm just using really simple tool, Universe Clockwipe, which just allows me to sort of animate it on nice with a nice soft edge, as you can see there. So it's sort of breaking down the logo bit by bit, and then using different tools to make the animation much quicker, really. So you can see as we build this up, so then I've got a background coming up. You can see that line there. Now, one of the things, because all of the elements are very two-dimensional and flat, I wanted to add some light leaks. So you can see here, there's a big texture sort of appeared, and that appears and sort of moves around over time, and it just gives some nice movement and a bit of fluidity to it. I tend to cheat. There's a tool within Universe called Overlight, I think. But rather than that, I actually use a fractal background. And I find the fractal background's quite a nice sort of organic thing. And the thing I like about it is by changing some values on it, you can make it look different to any other light leak you see, and it's quite organic. And you can see it's sort of starting to build up a bit of animation. There's some nice color movement. And then I just sort of build, like this ball, I just sort of cut out the element by itself, and that actually just fades on. So it's not sort of being tricky with every element as such, but if I turn these off and come back to the end result again, the big key was making it animate in. So sort of the key elements to this, I'm using a light just to trace around the shape of that triangle. And then I've used Knoll Light Factory, which allows you, for those who haven't seen it, there's a version in Universe, a more simplified version that gives you a selection, like quite a good selection. But in this case, it enables me to come into a designer, and you can sort of play with every attribute of the lens flare. So normally my working practice is I come into the lens flare presets, pick something you like as a good starting point, and then I come and just sort of tweak the various elements to make it what I want it to do. And obviously in this case, it's mostly blue because of the branding, and the branding's defined by the client, so I have to sort of be true to that. And then just adding a hint of purple in. But it's just, I quite like the rectangle look, and it's totally up to you. You can see there's loads of different presets in there. And it just saves you a lot of time rather than having to build it. You can see here, you can come and add individual assets. This is the list of the assets I've got, and it goes on and on. So as I say, this is a much more advanced system than the one in Universe, which has a lens flare package. But by applying the lens flare to the light, you can see the lens flare just tracks the position of that light. In this case, I'm not actually using the light to light anything up. The light is just basically a location, a central point source for the lens flare. You can see it just sort of turns off to bring it around. So the thing with a graphic like this is, although as an editor you wouldn't normally build graphics like this, I tend to do it myself because I find it more fun rather than just cutting pictures together. You're creating something out of nothing. A few other.
Jason,
yes.
sorry to interrupt.
There were two questions. Oh, God.
Yes. Go on, Nick. Go on.
Oh, so I think we're on the same page, Max. There were two questions actually from an audience member. And the first one was, what organization system are you using in After Effects?
Organization system. I'm not really sure what you're referring to.
I'm.
But My way, I use, well, obviously a layer for each element that I'm playing with. If you mean the colors, like I use color coding to remind me of things.
Okay.
I
guess
if that's what you mean with.
Perhaps the project organization, like your folder structure, how you import things and organize your comps and assets and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess I always do a numbered folder structure. I use a couple of techniques. I use a numbered folder structure just to keep things, I'm a bit pedantic when it comes to tidiness. I like every project I build, I like to make sure everything's labeled and everything has some kind of label. I think it's really important to stick with that, especially if you're handing it off to other people. My newest habit is I tend to do everything in camel case, which Harry would obviously know a lot about. I think because I play with scripting, it just works better to get in good coding habits. So I tend to write things camel case, which means the first word has a lowercase and every other word has an uppercase to start the word with no spaces or extra characters. And then I have sort of a folder structure, and then I also use color coding on my layers so I know what I'm doing. This project, although this is an actual project done for a client probably a month ago, I've actually recolored this, so the light green just tells me their elements, red giant elements have been used within them, and the dark green aren't so important for the red giant aspect. Obviously, every element is part of it. Normally, I might do things like I'll use different color coding to remind me of what each layer is doing. And it just makes things faster to work through.
And the second question, Jason, was, are you using a resolution standard? So are you using 4K or 8K in terms of your project deliveries? Or are you just using still 1920 by 1080?
Yeah, the majority of the stuff I do is 1920 by 1080 because most of the sports world, international sports world, still working in that format. There's more and more 4K or UHD, more accurately, coming in. But the majority of work is still HD. A lot of live stuff is now being done 50p to create the illusion of interlacing, like the smoothness of interlacing. A lot of people aren't up on interlacing, but it causes a lot of people problems. We used to use interlacing, which is a way of splitting frames into two fields. So like in my world, we work on 25 frames per second. By giving you 50 fields per second, it creates a smoother movement. But the latest standard now that things will deal with, you can see up here, I'm in 25 frames per second. Lately, we use 50 progressive frames per second on a lot of sport because it has that smoothness that mimics interlacing, but gives you better image quality with 50 full frames. But yeah, HD, and I tend to always work in 32-bit, mainly for a 10-bit output, although a lot of sports places are still using 8-bit, which can look a bit ugly on graduations.
Jason,
yes.
I think you already mentioned before that it was 25 frame per second, right?
Yes, that's right.
And there's another questions in the chat. Jay is asking, are the assets created in Photoshop or Illustrator?
It's sort of a range. In this case, you can see I've got EPS files. It depends. Like in this case, this logo was actually provided by the client I was doing the job for. So that's actually the actual logo, the finished logo, which looks like that, is actually designed by someone else. I'm just handed it as an Illustrator file. So I do things, I use Illustrator to go in. So if we look at the elements, you can see that's just that, almost like a guitar pick. So I open up the Illustrator file and I break it apart and create myself. In fact, if we come into assets, logo build, so we have the full logo there, which says black writing. If I turn that on, you can see. So
that's always tricky what to do with the trademark when they have that as a part of the logo, breaking it apart from the bevel and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's also, depending on who you're working for, it can be a big issue of being true. And like a lot of people, like for example, you can say I've got rid of the writing, but I've left the trademark because it's very important to the client to leave that on. And it's also one of the dilemmas I have in my job because I'm working for big international sports bodies. They have a team of branding people who scrutinize everything. So if the color was slightly wrong, it would be rejected and I'd have to redo it. So that can be quite difficult. But so in this case, you can see from the full logo, I've broken it down to give me a ball asset, which is just the ball, that icon, and then the trademark, which is all I've actually used. And then I've sort of gone and built other bits and pieces. So to bring on the ball, you can see the ball forms with some scan lines, which if we have a look at that, so that's just a load of stroke elements, so just single line animation. And then to give it a bit more depth, I've used the shine tool, which you can see here. So it's just trap code shine, which just gives me some nice light rays off it, and it's just little subtle ways of bringing extra elements into everything to build it up. So I think one of the things when I'm explaining it to people is you look at this graphic and it might look quite elaborate and complicated, but the reality is it's a load of simple layers treated one at a time. And in fact, one of my favorite tools in the Universe toolkit I've used to make the front, if we come back and have a look at the icon, which you can see is just a flat blue color, just making that push back was a bit boring. So I thought a nice way to make it look more interesting is I've used the Universe Lustre tool, which is designed to do sort of 3D text, but it gives you this nice sort of metallic look, and it gives you this nice bevel, and it does all this automatically. So where this looks almost 3D like, I haven't had to do anything. I've just sort of stuck a tool on. If we open the dashboard, you can see, if we come to the Lustre tool, you can see you get a whole load of presets in there. So it's a brilliant tool, and you can see here's the preset I've saved, so I can apply that look to any text or anything else I do, which is another nice thing, which is also good for collaboration. So for example, I could save that as a preset and hand that over to any of the other guys demonstrating, and they could build text with the same thing. But this is one of the cool things I use as a person who actually is editing fast turnaround stuff all the time. A tool like Lustre is brilliant because I can apply it. And in this case, all I've done is picked one that is sort of what I liked, and then I've come in and tweaked the colors to match the branding colors that I want. And then you can see as that pushes back, it gives it that nice 3D look. And then this bit here, I've just keyframed one of the attributes. So you can see here the center and the angle and the vertical offset. I've just done to make it look like a sort of glassy ripple through it. And then at the same time, you can see it actually just disappears. I've just got the opacity disappearing. So if I bring on the original logo, that's just sort of added over the top of the original logo. So if that lands, it's almost like that nice line reveals the flat logo. And the key is at the end result, I wanted to make sure that was true to the original branding so that I can't get pulled up on that. So it's a technique of bringing some life to the animation and making it build up in a cool way. I'll just go to one element of the body. So as I said, it had 24 teams. So this was like a little introduction graphic. A lot of these tools are available in Premiere. I tend to prefer After Effects because you've just got a lot more control and keyframing's easier. And if you get into expression work, it's easy to link things to each other. So my plan with this was I built everything sort of 6 seconds long, and then I took all these chunks into Premiere, edited them together with a piece of music and added sound effects, and the whole thing worked quite well. So this next one was an example of one of the team sections, of which there's 24. And now the big thing here is the only thing we could access were still images from Getty. Getty's a photo library that you can pay for, and it's quite significant in sport because they tend to have photographers at every event, so you end up with good access to things. And looking at this is just a number of things. So the background image I've just made black and white, but as a separate layer, you can see I've just cut out a key element of it, which just gives it some more depth. And then just to build up, we've got the same blue background. We're using a fractal background to create the light leaks. There's elements like this 21 were provided to me because it was for the under 21s, and the crosses is part of the branding. So again, they're all EPS files that I've just sort of blended in, but stuck them behind the player. And then there's a slight push on it. And I've done things like that same light effect. We come forward. You can see I'm using exactly the same lens flare, so it has a sort of look to it. And the lens flare is both behind and in front. I've done 2 layers, but you can see it's all the same elements from the first graphic, all applied. And it's just using things like a little bit of movement on it, bringing up the name in an approved font. The flag, I've just sort of darkened a corner, which is just a stylized idea, just a way of making it look cool, essentially. So I won't go through the different tools, but it's exactly the same thing. We've got a lens flare. I'm using the Universe Clockwipe to rotate to make the elements come on, especially this line and the shape and the cutout. And it just creates quite a nice look. And you can see here, this lens flare is over the top of this picture, so it's quite nice. It's sort of brighter behind his arm, but it gives you some nice depth and pulls him off the background a bit. And then the idea with this project is there's 24 of these, which each one on a separate team. And then I used one of the Universe transitions, the warp tool, which is very good, that we can have a look at another point in these next few weeks, to connect all the bits together. So it's sort of thinking in a modular way. And then each one of these tools, one of the nice things about Universe is you can do things like, if I come back to that Lustre example in the intro graphic, when you get something you like, I can save the preset. I can call it anything I want. Let's call it 121 Lustre. And the nice thing there is whenever I go choose a preset and we go to Lustre, you'll see that new one is underneath. And where this is powerful for collaboration is the cool thing about the Universe tools is if I go to my Finder, you can see here's the one we've just made, under 21 Lustre. I could easily share that file with any of my colleagues, and then they will get that exact same blue look with all the look I wanted. And the nice thing is being an RGX file, that's useful in Premiere, Avid, DaVinci, also on Mac and PC, so you're not tied to being on a particular host or in particular software. So the tools are perfect for collaboration in that sense. So that sort of ends that little example of a way of sort of creating something from nothing, if you like, where you've only got photos, and rather than just having a still photo, bringing some life to photos. I don't know if anyone has any questions or.
Very cool, Jason. Yeah, everybody is liking it, and one audience is asking, some audience are asking, is there any shareable presets that you can share, Jason?
Well, to be honest, a lot of what I have is not that far off the original presets. So one of the things I like about Universe is, like, for example, this fractal background, which I've used to create the texture. My working practice is I tend to come into the presets that are already here. And in fact, you can see here's the light leaks. That's what I would have started with. So I apply that, and then you can see here's the one I've actually saved. I normally apply it, which gives you a nice starting point. So once you apply that, like if I apply it now, for example, it's applied it. And then we can come in here, and that's already set everything up for me. And then you can just come and sort of play with numbers as you like. Like if we solo that layer, it's just a case of sort of playing with, you can see the scale, you can tweak things to make it work how you want. So there's not really any presets that are that amazing that I've used. It's just a case of using the tools available to you. Like even the lens flares, I find 90% of the time there's a preset really close to what I want. As a rule, I tend to always change something, be it the color or especially any of the tools, like in the Fractal Background, you normally have a seed control. I'll quite often pick a different seed or just change something to make it look a bit different. But so I guess the simple answer is I don't really have any presets that are really that exciting, to be honest there.
Cool.
Jason,
and on top of that, yeah, sorry, Nick, go on.
Oh, sorry, there was just an expansion to that question. I think they were also asking if they could use your project files for practice. And I'm assuming myself that that's not the case because of the rights of the things that you're working for.
Normally there are things I can share, but because this is owned by a client and I don't own any of this imagery, I can't share this. It's not for me to share, I'm afraid.
And just with that to be said, I do have some examples more than probable later this month that I would be able to share on my end as examples that we will place up when that webinar occurs.
Yeah, I can look at creating some bits that we can share as well, but this was just a quick example of an actual job that I've done recently.
Yeah, and also Russell is asking if these presets shares easily between Premiere Pro and After Effects. They are, right? Because yes, once you create it, exactly.
Yeah, I think the key is because, as you saw here, they save them on a Mac. Let's go back here. On a Mac, they appear in your documents, and you just have a Red Giant folder, and you can see here all the different Red Giant apps. So within Universe, all my presets are just in there. So I could email that to someone, and you can see here 32K, so it's a tiny file. So they're automatically, all of the applications on my computer, so when I'm in Avid or Premiere or anything, it automatically looks in the same location. So when I would open, say, Lustre in my Avid, it will still see these same presets. So they're all visible everywhere. And then you can obviously email them, you can share them. if you work in a facility, you could set up a network share where all the edits can look at it the same and or sync that folder because all the computers look at that point. But yeah, so they're very shareable and across PC and Mac as well.
Great. There's one more question from Neil, Jason's. He has a questions regarding interpolations and S-curves. What is your best method to apply smooth motions via S-curves or Bezier curve motions?
So if we're talking about like keyframing, the keyframing I will tend to normally use Bezier or EZ is tends to be like. In fact, if we look at, well, in this case they're just linear. A lot of the time it depends on what it is. If they're single things and they're quite quick, I might do linear. Generally, I will do EZ on things. I don't think there is that much animation in this. Yeah, so in this case it's all linear. It kind of depends on the job, I think. If I have lots of items sort of flying in at different speeds, I think in that case Bezier is quite nice, or EZ because they tend to sort of all stagger in rather than everything flying in together. It's
Jason,
kind of.
sorry. I had something just to add to this, just on my own workflow, which is if I want a super smooth motion, what I'll do is actually go in to the keyframes and change the velocity value right away to a value of 66%, which in velocity, an EZ's velocity, I think, is set to a value of 33%. And by making it 66, you get a similar ease than this old After Effects expression, which I can't remember the name of it. I think it was called like either like super ease or something similar on AE scripts. But it provides this really nice easing in many cases for the motion of logos without having to adjust any curves. And I could show that later.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Could you also share your insights, Jason, about this MoGraph work? Is it like there's also questions in the chat about this. Is it like a final kind of work, or do you normally go through iterations between the versions?
There's definitely iterations, but a lot of the work I do being sport, quite often the timescale we work on is a lot less, and it depends on the client. Like quite often I'll make graphics, like I might make something like this as an intro to a feature that just the producer will see, and then it will go to air because there's just not enough time for anyone to mess around with it. Like in fact, I worked on a darts championship once where the semi-final was held and we needed that to define who was in it. And then I built graphics to promo the final, which was on 15 minutes later. So it was sort of a situation that if anyone changed their mind about it, it just never would have went to air. A job like this one, because this is for a large international sporting body, there's a whole marketing team who look at it and make sure I've followed their rules and made the colors right. So there are a lot of jobs that take a lot of time. I'm working on a big project for the upcoming Euros, which was supposed to be last year and they've been postponed to June this year. And that's a job where the motion graphics will probably take the best part of 3 or 4 weeks to make, because there's a production side to it of what value it brings to the production. And then there's the creative branding side that everything's got to look right for the people I'm making it for. So that can be a lot of iterations and a lot of sort of playing and toing and throwing. So I would say my work is definitely no simple rule, like, and the same with the editing work. Some work I might spend 4 weeks cutting 30 minutes, and then I might spend 1 day cutting 4 minutes, and it goes to air at the end of the day.
Nice, nice. Great. It's definitely an iterative process, right, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably let's move to Harry.
Great.
Let me get everything turned on here. So hopefully, I'm going to put my microphone quite close here. These trees outside my office window haven't been trimmed in 2 years. And of course, this is the morning that they decide to go out there and start trimming them. So as I've found, this is usually a lot louder for me than it is for people that are watching. So, okay. So yeah, for me to share, is there anything I need to do specifically, or are you controlling that, Max?
Sorry?
Do I need to define anything to share my
Okay.
screen?
Let me make you presenter. Sorry. Sorry. Yes, you're a presenter now. You should
Okay.
be able to share screens.
When ready,
Yeah.
show my screen. Okay. Okay, so I want After Effects in the foreground here, not myself. Okay, it really wants to put zoom in the foreground. Okay.
I see your full After Effects screen, Harry, just to let you know. Even if you see
Okay.
that GoToWebinar panel, it probably is invisible.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay, so so today I wanted to talk about one of the tools in Universe called Typographic, and this was designed as a kind of easy go-to tool for title design, for full screen titles, lower thirds, that kind of thing. It kind of consolidates all the basic tools that you need to create, you know, just some simple titles with some basic shapes, and has some options in there to integrate external layers if needed. So I just wanted to walk through the basic lower third creation with this tool, just to kind of show how this works. Just kind of show the pluses of using a tool like this versus designing in After Effects. Not that this is a 100% replacement for After Effects. I've worked in After Effects since 1995. It's a great tool. I've just kind of put everything in one place where everything animates, and then you have all your tools in one spot, so that you can create and share titles like this. So this is what we'll be creating. And I think I have a blank comp here with, in fact, this doesn't have anything on it. So I'm going to apply Typographic, which is in the text category of Universe. And I'm just going to put this on a blank solid. And I have just a stock image in the background, just because I like to have an image in the background when I'm making a lower third, because it gives me a good reference as to what it's going to look like, if it's too busy or not busy enough. And I also want to make sure, if I'm putting this on an external layer, that I want to set the blend to none. If we're applying the effect directly to the footage, then I'd want to leave the blend set to normal. Okay, so the default settings are, well, they look like that. I'm going to actually start with a basic preset, just to kind of get us in the right direction, and I can kind of walk through what the preset is loading and what things that get changed here. Let me go through here. These are actually going to get organized and get a lot of new presets pretty soon. This, I believe, is the one I'll be working with. There we go. So the basic idea with Typographic is that it has 2 text generators and 2 shape generators. There's some other bells and whistles in there that I'll talk about as well, as some kind of bonus things that kind of get tucked away into some of the folders. But the basic idea is that you have 2 text generators that can have two different fonts, two different fonts, and we can have 2 different shapes that we can control. And all these things have automatic animation, so that they can animate without keyframes, and you can define the timing and how they animate in terms of position, scale, even position, some tracking, rotation, that kind of stuff. Now I'm going to grab the sample text that I used before, just so that we don't have our lorem ipsum text. I used a random name generator website. And oh, I guess, well, yeah, I'll save myself some time by copying and pasting the words senior creative director. Now, one thing to talk about is the fonts that are included with Universe. One of the things that we ran into when we were making type tools before was the fact that when you're dealing with a cross-platform environment in terms of the Mac OS and Windows, is that you're really limited to a very basic set of fonts that overlap between the two, such as like Arial and Times New Roman and just a bunch of fonts that you generally don't want to use. So with the installer, unless you specifically uncheck the option to not install the fonts, with the Universe installer, there are, I think, about 60 open source fonts that are installed. And then with the presets, we draw from these to create the presets. That way we're actually using type presets that are interesting and actually have some typographic merit to them. So I believe with this, with this one, I think I was using maybe Oswald. My kids used to watch a show called Oswald. I don't know if you guys ever remember that. And this one, Abril Fat Face. There we go. So as we can see, it's kind of animating the shapes and text in. It doesn't look bad. Obviously, it's not located in the lower third of the screen. Presets don't store the position information. Or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Let me back up. If I were to save this, it would store the position information. The presets that are loaded here in your dashboard have that position information stripped out. And the reason is you could be working in any number of resolutions. So what the lower third is, or where that bottom part of the screen is going to change depending on what composition you're using. So rather than try to guess or put it in the wrong place, presets just load it right in the center, and then you are free to move it using the position parameter, like so. So the animation section right here is an overall animation set of controls. This defines if it is animating in or if it is animating out. So often with lower thirds, I animate it in, but then just leave it. And then that way it leaves it flexible in the edit so that you can just, the editor can just fade it out. However, if you do want to animate it out, you can check the outro animation, and then it basically just backs out of the animation at that point in time. So you can see right here, the intro start is 0. So that's relative to the layer start. So if I move this down in the timeline, that 0 point in time is just relative to the layer. And then the outro is also relative to that layer start. So if I set this to, let's say, 7 seconds, at the 7-second mark, everything will start to animate out. I'm gonna leave that unchecked right now. So all this stuff here, animate position X, position Y, scale X, all that stuff, just disable, it enables or disables it for everything, all the objects within the effect. And then within the individual objects, such as the text or shapes, we define how much it is animating. That might not make a whole lot of sense. So let me show you exactly what I mean. So if I go into the text one, so that's the name, right? That's this text right here. I adjust the size. How much that is, or how that is animating, is defined in the animation values here, right? So position X 20% means that it's going to move 20% of the composition size. I'd like a more subtle movement here. So if I set this to something like 5%, it's just going to do a slight drift in from the right. If I were to set this to a negative value, -5, this would drift in from the left, which actually that doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to put it back to +5. And let's do the same for text 2. Text 2 also has its own animation values. So, oh, actually, look at that. It's actually, I forgot, I put that in there. If you don't want to deal with it, you can just leave this checkbox checked to use the values of text 1. So it's just going to follow the same animation values. But if you want it to animate slightly differently, you can do that. But there's also a delay. So you notice that text 2 comes in slightly staggered, which is just an aesthetic call. So, you know, if you wanted a quarter second of a delay, I can set that to 0.25, and then things will stagger in like that. Now I have two shapes drawing here, shape 1, shape 2. If I uncheck shape 1, you'll see that it is this orange shape on the left here. I'll make this a little bit bigger, and I'll change the animation of this. I forget what this is doing. It is moving in. So if I go to shape 1's animation values, you can see that its position X is set to a negative value. So it's moving from the left. I'll set this to 0, and I'll have it animate in terms of its scale. I don't actually have scale enabled, so I'm going to check animate scale X. So that now scale animation is enabled. And if I set this to, so a value of 0 means it will not animate, the scale will not animate at all. If I set this to -100, oops, I have these linked together. I want it -100 in X. So it's just going to kind of squeeze or unsqueeze, I guess, from a basically a scale is what we might consider 0. And then shape 2. Let's go in here. We'll do something more interesting with this. Rather than have it lie in, I'll have it kind of scale on as well. So let's go into the shape 2 animation values, and we'll have it also, whoops, unlink. I'll have this scale from -100, and it's scaling kind of from the wrong point. So I'm going to move it or have it animate along the x-axis. Let's see if I set it to right around -20. It'll move and scale, just kind of like so. There we go. Now, as Jason was showing, presets are easily shareable. And somebody asked in the chat, and I tried to answer in such a way that everybody could see it. But currently, when I save a preset, whoops, I'm not choosing a preset. I want to save a preset. Presets are all saved locally. And it is a no-brainer that it would be tremendously useful to have a shared network location for presets. And that's something that we're working on for upcoming releases. So currently, I'm going to call this number 2 because I was testing this and already made one. So I'll call this third design 2. So currently everything saves locally to that documents directory. And it's the same directory essentially for Mac and Windows, which is your documents / Red Giant, documents Red Giant Universe presets. So there's the file that I just saved. And if I wanted to get that file to somebody, I could just save that. Now, a quick note about these, the presets themselves. These are actually JSON based. So if you do work, well, if you work with JavaScript, or if you've kind of delved into After Effects data-based animation, you might have worked with JSON as well. But there's nothing stopping you from going into the preset files themselves. In fact, I do this all the time to edit the actual presets with the JSON here. So everything that you save, including the name, what was the name? And oh, are you? There it is. So the name could be edited right here. Or if you wanted to even strip this out so that you're not saving the text content with it, you could also do that. You could just remove it. Just make sure that you're saving it with valid JSON so that you're not having extra commas or anything like that. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I had no idea, and that was just so cool. The fact that you can actually go in that data and change it up in terms of the RGX file after you've saved it and share that with someone, or even make duplicate copies. I find that to be an amazing part, like an amazing workflow. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've gone through and you've tweaked it, and it's there's just a simple thing you want to fix, like, oh, I need to reset the position, and I don't want to go into After Effects, load it, save the preset file out again, and open it back up. If you just need to like reset the position to the center, or anything. In fact, this is something I do a lot because I kind of spearhead all these presets. So I do a lot of the data wrangling with these. So yeah, so you can edit all this stuff right here. I use Sublime Text, but whatever your favorite text or code editor is. In fact, it does not look like I even have this enabled for. This is kind of a new computer, so let's set this to JSON so it's actually formatting it correctly. There we go. Now, one thing I want to point out, admittedly, that this is something that needs to be fixed. So if I go in to my dashboard and I view that preset, which shows up in the custom section right here, the one that I just saved is called Lower Third Design 2, and you'll notice that it's blank. And this is what it's doing is it's actually saving the preset image automatically from frame 0, which in our case is absolutely useless because it's animating from frame 0, and then it animates on. So frame 0, it has no content. So the preset is grabbing the content of the layer itself. It's not grabbing a composite of things. So it's only grabbing the local layer. So I wanted to just briefly talk about shooting out an image as well as a animated preview. Now you'll notice when we save this into our presets, there's a folder called _media. And in here, you'll see that there are files that are a PNG that have your preset name -thumbnail.png and then your preset name -preview.mp4. As long as those are a name match, aside from the word preview and the file suffix, those will match to the preset, and those will show up here in the dashboard. Gosh, I almost called it the designer. In fact, I've already done this with one right here. So if I roll over this, you can see that we actually have a image preview as well as an MP4. So if I were to render this out, I just need to make sure to kind of scale it properly. You notice that this one right here, I kind of scaled it down to a slightly larger size, just because if I take the whole 1080 frame and squeeze that into a small window like this, it's not going to be as useful. So if you use a composition where something like this, so this is a 640 by 360 comp. In fact, I think I end up scaling it in Media Encoder to the actual. Let me double check here. These are 355 by 200, which is a dimension that you end up with when it's an engineering choice or UX designer choice or something like that, but that's what we got to work with. So I'm going to scale this down to something that looks half decent. If I save this out as a frame, oops, sorry, still newish to Windows. There we go. Save as a frame, and then I'm going to output this back to my directory, lower third design 2 -thumbnail, and I hit save. It's going to overwrite that one. I hit render. It's going to chime. And assuming that it updates, we should see the new thumbnail in, yeah, there it is. And then if I were to take that and render it out to an MP4, I won't take the time to do that because that will take extra minutes that we probably don't have. So if you want, then you could just take both of these and cart these over the internet or over your network. But I very, very much want to get the shared location as a upcoming feature, as well as search in the dashboard. Both of those things are things that we're hoping to get in there very, very soon.
Harry, I had actually
Thank
a
you.
question for you. Oh,
No, go on, Nick.
Go ahead.
Go on.
this was it's. I find it so interesting that you're wearing the hat of the designer of some of these tools that are inside of Universe, and I was curious to know what inspires you to make a specific effect per se. So every release, you put in 3 or 4 new tools, and then you update a ton of other tools. But I'm curious, what is it that inspires you to, let's say, go in to make a certain effect? And I know there's not one answer, but I'm just curious about that.
It is a bit all over the place. I mean, sometimes tools come to us, or like one of our designers or tutorial makers or filmmaker, like Seth Worley or Hashi, will have an idea and they'll hand me like an After Effects project and we'll make something out of that. Ecto came from an idea from Seth Worley. Hashi made a Sonic tutorial, actually a Bill and Ted and Sonic tutorial that had this electrical kind of thing. And that is, that's something that we're like, hey, that could be an effect. So sometimes it comes to us as an idea like that. Sometimes it's just direct customer requests. Jason was showing Clockwipe, which is not as exciting as Clockwipe is. I was surprised to find out that I think, or maybe it's still true, that Premiere, at least at the time, didn't have a Clockwipe. Somebody was like, please put a Clockwipe into Universe. So sometimes it's just a, please put this into Universe kind of request. Sometimes, it's just simply based on my experience. We were talking just before the show of where I've lived, and I used to work in Detroit, and I did a lot of corporate work for the automotive industry. I spent a lot of time doing lower thirds and handing them over to edit suites of different types. So we had media composers, and then they switched over to Final Cut. And it was always this conundrum of like, how do I design something and hold on to that design, but get it over to the edit suite with it flexible enough so that they can type in the name and they're not calling me to add a semicolon, and re-render it and send it back over to the edit suite. So this has always been this ongoing thing in my head of like, well, what's the best way to do that? And over the years, there's never really been a great solution for that. I mean, the solution is like, well, work in After Effects and Premiere, and you can, publish between the two. But there still hasn't been a lot of tools that are just like, here's something that just kind of does a lower third, and you can save this file out, and you design it here and send it there, and it should just work. So a lot of it's just kind of based on my personal experience of why doesn't this exist? And then I'm like, well, I guess I'll make it. A ray gun was like that too. I was actually working on a job and I was doing a lot of grid-based designs, and I'm like, I just need a tool that makes grids. And it just doesn't exist. And so I made one. So it's a lot of that, it's a lot of guesswork of like, I hope people like this, It's interesting to watch Jason work because, I spend so much time literally right here at this desk making stuff, and then I send it out, and I don't really see especially now or this past year where we can't get out, see anybody. It's hard to see what is useful and not useful to people. That's why it's always useful for me to get out to facilities and get out to events and stuff like that. So it's been a difficult year in terms of gauging, the usefulness of the tools. So this has been, it was interesting to watch Jason work as well. We're getting a lot of questions. I'm seeing questions come in.
Everybody's liking it, Harry. Harry for president. Love this guy.
I'm not one for politics, but I'll help anybody that wants to.
Thank you very much for the insights, Harry. One more question, probably a quick questions. would you create presets per name with the code? Like I suppose it's the JSON code previously, or would you just adjust the presets in After Effects with a new name?
Oh, if you had a bunch of names, that's a good question. If you had a bunch of names, I haven't had, so as the maker of the tool, I haven't like been on a job with, I've been on jobs like this, right? Where you have like 100 names. And this is why I make tools like this, right? So I haven't been on a specific jobs where, or like this, where I've been able to use this tool in that context. So I'm trying to think, if I were handed this job, what would I do? And I would think the process of saving out presets, I think would be more lengthy than just making 100 copies of it and just going in and just changing the name for each one. I'm sure somebody that is good with Python or Perl might even be able to have a lookup or have something grabbed from a table and insert it back into the files or something like that. But yeah, you could just put the name into each of the entries. That's probably what I would do, because you could easily locate that field, because I think they're all ID'd separately. So just look for the ID of that entry. It literally just says like ID, and it'll be like 4021 or whatever for that parameter, and just replace the name. That's what I would do, definitely.
Cool.
I could add something to that. If I think I would probably use a motion graphic template, or even use data-driven spreadsheets.
Yes, you could definitely do a data-driven Mogart, which I know Adobe doesn't like the term Mogart, but Mogarts are super powerful, and they can be expression-driven and used as data and stuff like that. This is just kind of I guess a streamlined, simplified version of what you could do with a Mogart.
Funny enough,
Go ahead.
Sorry, funny enough, I actually, just to add to this conversation with you and Jason in terms of lower thirds, I was tasked several years ago about doing the exact same thing, which is to put 200 lower third graphics onto a Premiere Pro timeline. And I used Photoshop, even though having motion graphic templates, some availability with that. Photoshop has, you can feed a lower third and Excel spreadsheet, and then you could automate all these lower thirds and even replace graphics with them inside the application. And then by having markers in the Premiere Pro timeline, that was sufficient at the time to get the job done, because there wasn't specific motion graphic requirements for each of the individual elements that made up the motion, the actual lower third.
Interesting.
I see. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a very nice insights, Harry. That's been very helpful. Nick, would you mind showing your part?
Yes, sure. I'm just checking the time and stuff like that, but I would love to share my screen. Let me just see if I can hand this over to myself.
I just made you presenter.
Oh, never mind. I don't have to do that. During these conversations, it actually got me thinking, Harry, of something that you, Jason, you were talking about organization in After Effects briefly from one of the questions that came up. And when it came to our organization in After Effects, there's this one site that I love. And Harry, you happen to be featured in an interview on the site. The site is by a gentleman by the name of Justin McClure.
Justin McClure, yeah.
And he has a site called GYST, which, pardon my French, is Get Your Shit Together. Harry is interviewed on this website. I'll share with everyone the link at the end of it. But you can actually download, I guess when you were doing freelance, your folders that are on your desktop. It's so cool. And see your
my method, which was it was actually kind of an adoption of Digital Kitchen's method at the time, after I had freelanced there for a while. And actually, interestingly, just to share this, I can share the link.
I got it up on my screen, by the way, right now too.
Yeah, there's a great script from I can share the link to it, that actually will automatically take all of your content and put it into all of the folders in the structure that you define, rather than you manually doing that. It's a really great script from. Well, I'll post the link to it. But.
Cool. I just downloaded your desktop folder structure here, where you have 4 main folders for development projects, elements, and output, and all your other organization and elements. Pretty cool. And how you organize those files. I think just in looking at this website for some of the other people that are interviewed, Justin McClure actually shares a script within After Effects where it will pre-populate folders for you.
Yeah.
It doesn't place things in those folders automatically, but it just creates the folders by scratch. And then there's an AE script called Motion 2 that actually would, if you had like a disorganized After Effects file, it would, based on the classification of the asset that you brought into After Effects, it would place it into like a movies folder or a still PSD folder.
David Torno, who's a great script writer, has one called Organize Project Assets, or OPA, which means different things depending on the language. I guess it can mean grandfather in German, or in Greek, I think it's just OPA. But it's sort of an automatic organization process. So you can have just a big messy project, and you run the script, and it puts everything in the right place. Puts your images in the images folder, puts your movies in the movies folder. Solids get all consolidated, and your project's going to, or your comp's going to comp folder. Pre-comp's going to pre-comp folder, that kind of stuff.
Cool. And now that I'm inside of Premiere Pro, both Jason and Harry talked about the idea of sharing these presets cross-platform, and me and Max set up a workflow just sort of showing setting up or making some slight tweaks to a preset, and then looking that inside of Resolve. So I'm just going to show my Premiere side rather quickly, where Jason, I think you were mentioning the fact that you use Overlight quite a bit, which has its own sort of sense of light leak flares and textures that you can reference to kind of give you these lovely bright spots on the screen. So I'm going to select one of these right now. Let me go with Line Sparkle, and with my dashboard set up here, as well as in my Premiere timeline, I have under my sequence menu this option called Selection Follows Playhead currently on, which goes on automatically whenever you enter into the Lumetri workspace. But this allows it to easily apply any effect from Universe in the presets category to your clips in Premiere Pro, as well as then have access to all of its controls inside the effect controls area. So here are the line Sparkle, and I'm just going to make a few changes to this. One is I could select a different Overlight preset here from a variety of different type of light leak textures. One of my other favorites is that if you grab something like spikes and go to the flip light leak section, you could flip it on a different axis, vertical, horizontal, or even both. Depending on that light leak preset or what you're going for, you can also increase the flicker value. So I'll up that to 100%, which will be quite intense, as well as add on top of this your own hue. So I could select in this case, I'll use my eyedropper to select a color here in the image, and then increase the hue intensity. If I were to save this as a preset, I simply save that as a preset, which heads to my Documents folder on the Mac under the Red Giant Universe folder, and I can then grab this RGX file and, let's say, share it to someone who is going to be completing this project, adding even color correction elements from Magic Bullet Looks, but all inside of Resolve. And that's just what I did. I basically took this highlight preset and saved it out. And then through email, the RGX files aren't very large in size at all. I was able to send that to Max, and you have a copy of this in your DaVinci timeline, don't you, Max?
Exactly, Nick. But Nick, before you're handing it over to me, there's a very simple question from Mark. Could you show how to create marker in the timeline?
Yeah, so there's two types of markers in the Premiere Pro timeline that you can utilize. One is if there's no clip selected and you press M, a marker, that's the shortcut, is created right here on the time track. The other type of marker that can be created is on the clip itself, and then pressing M, and then you've got a marker on the clip. Now, if you go to your window menu in Premiere Pro, there actually happens to be a marker dialog box. In fact, that's already somewhere in my interface. And depending on what's selected, see if I have the timeline selected, it's showing me the timeline markers. If I have a clip selected, it would actually show me the clip markers. And I could navigate between those two elements depending on what's selected and navigate between them by simply clicking, which is pretty cool. So that's in terms of creating markers there on your timeline. These markers can be referenced by something in terms of that lower third sequence that I was sharing, or that idea of automating things to sequence, where markers can be referenced when you select the automate to sequence option in the lower right-hand corner of the project panel. Does that answer the question, Max?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick.
Okay, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Okay.
There you go. I've just selected you from that long list of people.
Okay. Yeah, in this case, I'm not using the same timeline, Nick. I am using the same clip, however.
Awesome.
Can you see my screen, by the way?
I can, yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so I would like to talk about Overlight a little bit, about Universe a little bit, because most of the time when you want to use Universe, sometimes you use it to create text, sometimes you use it for to create lower third, for example, or titles. But as a colorist, if you're doing color corrections, you can also use Universe plugins to create look. You can expand your look, design your look using Universe. And if you're working in Resolve, if you're, for example, editing in Resolve, and you want to establish a look by using Universe, you can use Universe as a effect from the effect library. And to do that, you can just press the effects library and search for Overlight in this case, or any Universe plugins, and then you can just simply drag and drop it to the clip. And to access the parameter, you can simply just go to the inspector and do the tweak in the effects panel. However, that's not the part that I want to show you, so I can just delete it. So if, for example, you're working with an editor, like Nick handed me the presets, the look presets, and I supposed to expand the look, there are many possibilities that you can do in Resolve. For example, what I normally do is that I will do this very nice trick that I think this is very handy, is that by grouping your clips based on the way you want to grade it. So for example, I group all these 4 clips, and by grouping this clip, you can see you have more node structure. So for example, let me show you. This is the clips that doesn't group, as it was not grouped. And as you can see, you only have nodes in the timeline, in the clip, and in the timeline level. So by grouping those clip into groups, you will have more. So you have the group pre-clips, and which means that everything that you apply in this node tree will happen before the clips, and then the clip itself, the post clip, and then also the timeline, which affects the whole entire timeline. So what I've done here is literally I use my first node as a noise reduction node, but at the moment I don't use any noise reductions. So the second node I have is a balancing node, literally just balancing the footage. And after balancing the footage, I then break my node into parallel nodes. And here I have a shape to just accentuate the subject. And it's just a power window. So if I turn it off, as you can see, I'm just highlighting the subject by just using a power window. And you can just go creatively with this by using any other shape you like. But in my case, I just use one that I feel right to this. And then I have another secondary corrections if I want to do that. But I pipe my secondary corrections not from the parallel nodes, but instead I go right away from the balance node, so that whenever I do secondary corrections, and if I change anything in the shape nodes, if there's a exposure change in the shape nodes, nothing will affect my secondary corrections by having it separate and having it directly from the node number 2. And then from there, I go to vignette in the next node, the vignette nodes. It's literally a power node, a power window in the nodes, and I just decrease the gamma intensity, and then I add a contrast at the end. This is before the contrast, and that is the contrast by just using the simple S curves. Now, the thing with the look, I can use another node somewhere in the back, or at the end of the change, but then that wouldn't be very neat. If I have a project that utilizes the same camera and it has the same look for the entire timeline, what I can do is that I can place the node in the post clip group. So here in my very first node, I just warm up the gamma a little bit. As you can see in the gamma wheel, it's I move the point closer to the orange. So that's effectively increased the gamma. And then here I put the OFX, which is OFX node, which is just the Overlight node. And to do that, so for example, if I just reset the node, to do that, you can just simply type in Overlight and then drag and drop it to the node that you like. So when you are working with OFX, if you want to have a more real estate in your screen, you can simply press the Shift F and you have this overview interface. Sorry, overview interview. Oh my God, sorry. Yeah, and I can use the presets that Nick shared with me. In this case, I already put it into the folder. So I can choose the preset and apply it. So here I have the possibility to play around with the opacity. So I can also make it less visible. And if I go back, Shift F. Another thing to know is that if you want to reduce the opacity on the node, you can use the key tools here, and you can start to reduce the key output. In this case, you can type in 0.5, or you can also drag the value. And you can do this to your liking. And in my opinion, like less is more. So I can just put it a little bit less obvious. And then on top of that, I add the same curves, the S curves, and I reduce the saturations in the black by using the Luma versus saturations. So I just drop the whole saturations level in the shadow area by just doing that. And last but not least, to make the look complete, what I normally do is I put the grain by using the renoiser. So that is a small peek into the pipeline, into the workflow. And in the upcoming webinar, we will talk more about conforming, about round tripping from Premiere Pro, and then doing more of the grades in Resolve, and we will walk you through the conforming process. So I think we hit the end of the time. Is there any more questions?
There was a question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
How
you got that.
important
You
is
got
the
that
grain?
question. That's it.
Yeah. The grain is really important to me. This is the one that makes the overall look fused together. Some people doesn't really like it, but it's really subjective. It's really depends on the DOP in this case, if you're working with a director of photography when using grain. What's special about the grain inside Renoiser is that instead of just adding another grain layer on top of your image, Renoiser is actually rearranging the pixel in your image and shifting around those pixels. And then also it's very good if you are exporting your program into online platform which have compressions algorithm. By having a grain into your baked into your clip, you will reduce the banding, for instance. You'll be able to reduce the banding. Right.
Cool. There was a message down here, Max, just about the links, and I know that Harry will supply some of those links, and we'll send that out after this webinar. About an hour, you'll have some links included in the GoToWebinar link that you basically signed up for this webinar. And on top of that, I shared the link to the Justin McClure page if anyone was interested, which has some of the AE scripts that we had discussed in terms of organization.
And then also, you can also check the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. The video will be uploaded in the channel, and all the links will be included as well in the recording. All right. So it's been great, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Max.
Yeah, great.
And we'll see you next Monday then. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.